Welcome everyone to this East West Railway company online session with your neighbouring parishes and councillors along central Bedfordshire in the Marston Vale line. My name is Jordi Vescoche and I'm one of the engagement managers at the East West Railway company, and we are pleased that you can join us tonight to this second meeting following on from the one that we held back in April on the first week of consultation. As I advised on the invitation for tonight, the session today is an opportunity for you to raise any outstanding questions that you or your residents might have on our proposals. Now that you've had a chance to engage with the consultation documents, and I'm guessing residents would have been in touch with you, and basically the purpose of tonight is kind of like ensure that we've tackled all your key questions before you submit your response to the consultation. Ahead of today's session, we ask you to let us know if there were any questions or issues that you wanted us to address during the meeting. Thank you to those of you who've written to us. We've tried to capture that in the slides, but if you haven't, no problem, don't worry, there will be plenty of time during the Q&A. We have allocated a lot of time to that. Also to let you know that we're holding similar sessions with all the parishes and councillors within the consultation zone between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week. And in terms of structure of tonight's session, so we're going to start with a presentation that will run for around half an hour, followed by a 50-minute Q&A before we wrap up with some next steps. So in total, we should be done in around 90 minutes. Said that, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team that is joining me tonight. We have our Program Delivery Director, Ian Parker, who will take on the presentation in a second. We also have our Development Manager for CS2, Stephen Barker, our Head of Program Consents, Kirsty Young, and we're also joined by Hannah McCarthy and James McCollum from ACOM and Barley, who are supporting us holding this session with note-taking and monitoring the chat bar. Before we start the presentation, as you can see on the slide, I'm going to run you through a brief housekeeping and Zoom etiquette note. By now many of you are familiar with Zoom, but just as a reminder, you'll find in the bar below different features, including the buttons to mute and unmute yourself, share your camera, open the chat window, or check the list of participants. We'd be grateful if you could rename your username to display your full name if your Zoom account doesn't show your actual name already. And we'd also ask you to please keep yourself muted at all times unless you're given the floor during the Q&A to avoid those kind of unpleasant echoes and noises. If you experience any technical issues during the meeting, please email contact@East West Rail. We're going to be monitoring the email account throughout the session, and we would try then to pull you back in if you experience any issues. And in terms of the Q&A session, so we're going to aim to address your questions, any questions that we're not able to kind of respond to tonight. If we run out of time, we would take away and follow up via email afterwards. During the Q&A, if you want to ask a question, please indicate so by pressing the raise your hand button, which you can find at the bottom right of the participants list. And I believe that's all the housekeeping. Oh, before I forget, one more thing. We are recording this session and we're going to make it available together with the deck that we present tonight, hopefully early next week, in case you want to rewatch it or you want to share with some of your colleagues or residents. On that note, I think, now I'm done. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ian.
Okay. Thanks, Jordi. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Ian Parker. I'm the Programme Delivery Director for East West Rail. So I'm responsible for ensuring that the three phases of the programme, which is East West Rail, get delivered on time and at the sort of budget that's been set by government. But I suppose most importantly that we deliver a scheme that's right for the communities that it passes through. So very keen to get your views later on in the session tonight. Before we get into that, I'm going to just flick through these slides without reading them out in detail, but who have we invited? So effectively, this section of the route around Lidlington has formed this evening's presentation. Also, as well as parish councils, we've invited Central Bedfordshire Council. In terms of what we're covering tonight, so well, 4 things really, but mainly focusing on the latter ones in terms of questions. So we'll give you a quick recap around what we're consulting on. I appreciate you've probably heard and read about this quite a lot already, so we'll rattle through that fairly quickly. And if you do need more detail at the end, we'll of course come back to it. We'll then talk about some of the key themes that have already emerged. Obviously, we've had a lot of feedback from lots of people already, and so we'll give you some feedback on what that's been, and try and answer some of the questions that have been raised. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can get your communities more involved in the consultation, and then we'll take questions at the end. So just to remind you what East West Rail is all about, we have a non-statutory consultation which is running between March or the end of March and June. And if we just move on to the next slide there, please. In this 10-week consultation, what we're aiming to do is to share our scheme plans, our proposals with you, and ask you to share your thoughts with us on what you think of the plans. And so the consultation document, which you'll have seen and hopefully either downloaded or requested a hard copy of, talks about 2 things really. One is about customer experience, because we do need to understand how best the railway should operate. And then also about the infrastructure proposals, which we've broken down into a number of sections, which have been defined by the geography. If we move on to the next one, what you can see on this slide is, so that shaded area is the zone within which we've been consulting. And so what you can see there is that zone extends way past Bicester out to the west and down to Oxford. And the reason that we're consulting on the whole of that area, even though most of the infrastructure is either built or is being built at the moment, is because, as I say, we need to understand from people in those areas as well how the service will be used. And we need to know that from you as well, but also, of course, we want to talk to you about the impact that the scheme will have in your area, where construction is a long way yet from starting. So if we move on, and we'll talk a little bit more about customer experience and the railway operations. And in the next slide, what you can see is some of the areas where we're focusing on. So the focus is very much on the end-to-end journey, from how people go about planning their journey, how they get to the station, then when they get to the station, what they need, and that can range from somewhere to park a car or a bike, through to facilities in the station building itself, what's needed on the platform, what facilities can be provided to help people boarding and getting off trains, and one of the things we're looking at is how we make that step between the platform and the train as easy as possible for all sorts of people. Then we're asking you about the experience on the train and what facilities you need, recognizing the type of journey that it is. It's relatively short, but if you went end to end, you'd still be on the train for a good period of time. And what sort of experience you want from the staff that will be on the trains, because bear in mind, East West Rail Company is not just about building the railway, it's about operating the service that we provide the railway to operate on. There's then we're asking you about how you alight the train at the end of your journey, about interchange with other lines, because of course we are, as I'm sure you've noticed, cutting a number of other major intercity routes. What your expectations are in terms of onwards travel. That's both by other trains, of course, and by the modes of transport. And then what, if anything, you need after your trip in terms of abilities to feed back or get more information and so on. So if we move on to the next one, so this covers a lot of the same points again, actually, but it might be a slide that you've seen before. So as I say, we're consulting on the all of the things you see on the right there, all of which I've really already talked about, so we won't dwell on that one for too long. So moving on then, the consultation this time is really focused on the areas that you can see in the coloured boxes, and we've labelled them A, B, C, D across to the end of the scheme. We're not showing, obviously, we're not showing proposals for the scheme between Bicester and Bletchley, because that scheme already is in construction. So, however, there are works that are being proposed between Oxford and Bicester. So our consultation documents cover those. You'll be more interested, of course, in the section between Bletchley and Bedford. And so the green section here, section B, project section B, is where we're going to focus most of our time this evening. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to hand over to Stephen, and Stephen's going to talk to you about talk to you about the infrastructure we're proposing in this area and some of the questions that you've raised. So Stephen.
Thanks very much, Ian, and good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Barker. I'm the Development Manager for East West Railway Company, dealing with the section of the route from Oxford through to Bedford. Looking specifically at the Marston Vale line, the section of line between Bletchley and Bedford, which I'm guessing is of most interest to everyone on the call tonight. A quick recap of what it is we're proposing. I think, you know, we've said it a few times, excuse me, a few times in a few places, and it might sound a little bit cliched, but really, East West Rail really does represent a once in a generation opportunity for the Marston Vale line. I mean, the Marston Vale line is historically a section of railway that has suffered from a lack of investment. It's been subject to sort of various closure attempts over the years as well. And really now we're looking at turning it into an important part of a cross-country route as it once was, and investing a significant sum of money into the railway to bring it up to the sort of standard it needs to be at to perform its new role. We're looking at a lot of different aspects of the line, and they include I'm hoping you can still hear me. I think I just temporarily lost connection there.
You did, yes.
Sorry about that. Hopefully it'll come back now and it will remain stable. I think the weather's playing havoc with it, unfortunately. Yeah, so we're covering a number of different aspects on the Marston Vale line. I mean, amongst the things we're discussing are how vehicles and pedestrians cross the railway, looking at how we potentially replace level crossings with alternative means of getting from one side of the line to the other. We're looking at different station and train service concepts, how frequently the train service is called at various stations. And we're also looking at how we actually carry out the upgrade works on the Marston Vale line. There are different approaches we could take. All of this is covered in section B of the consultation materials, which I'm sure many of you will already have looked at. Moving on to the next one. So as we said, we're going to attempt to cover some of the key themes that have come out so far. What we've done here is as you might expect, we've had lots of questions, but many of them do group around sort of common themes and issues. So we're trying to pick out some representative questions that highlight some of those key themes. What comes up next is a series of slides covering different areas of the work we're doing. And then there's a number of questions on each of those, worded as we've received them. I'll read those out pretty much word for word off the screen and then provide an answer for them. And then obviously later on we can have a more open Q&A session as we've discussed. So if we go on to the first one, so the first theme is around concepts 1 and 2 for local communities. What do they mean for local communities? So first of all, if we move on, a quick recap of what we're talking about here. We've put forward 2 concepts for how the train service might operate in future. Concept 1 retains the existing hourly service that operates between Bletchley and Bedford at the moment and calls at all 10 intermediate stations. And on top of that, we superimpose the East West Rail services, and they would comprise 2 trains an hour in each direction from Bletchley through to Cambridge and 2 trains an hour from Oxford through to Cambridge. Those East West Rail services would, between Bletchley and Bedford, only call at Woburn Sands and Ridgemont though. So Woburn Sands and Ridgemont would see 5 trains an hour, but the remaining stations would continue to just see 1 train an hour in each direction. The new East West Rail services would complete that journey from Bletchley to Bedford in around 22 minutes, which is almost half of the current journey time from end to end, which is around 42 minutes today. We move on to the next one. In the consultation documents, you'll see that there is an indicative timetable. We've produced it. The purpose of putting that in there is really to illustrate the pattern of services that would operate. That doesn't necessarily represent exactly the train service that will operate in future, so please don't bank on there being an 11:06 departure from Woburn Sands. It might be at a slightly different time, but broadly speaking, that's the structure of the timetable we would expect to operate and the approximate journey times that we would expect to provide. Moving on. Concept 2 reconsiders the line really and tries to think about what the line really could do for the local community. The pattern of stations that are along the line at the moment are really reflective of how the area was maybe 80 years ago. The stations are in the same positions they've been in for many years. There were some new stations introduced in the early part of last century, but since that, broadly, not a lot has changed in terms of where the stations are. But in spite of that, the area around the line has changed tremendously during that period, and particularly during the last 50 to 60 years, with the growth of Milton Keynes and some of the other developments that have sprung up along the line. As we look to the future, of course, we can expect further change. We're already seeing planning applications for some quite sizable developments along the corridor. And looking at local plans and so on, we expect there to be more of those in future. So what we've tried to do with this concept is try and tailor the line to provide more for current and future needs, perhaps the existing service does. In this, the existing hourly stopping service would cease to operate, and instead we would just operate the 4 East-West Rail services each hour. And instead of the existing 10 intermediate stations between Bletchley and Bedford, the stations would be merged to provide 5 stations, which would be on new sites, different to the current ones by and large. So what we'd have is we'd have 2 trains an hour from Bletchley to Cambridge and 2 trains an hour from Oxford to Cambridge. But in this option, the Oxford to Cambridge trains would just call at Woburn Sands and Ridgemont, but the Bletchley to Cambridge trains would call at all of the 5 intermediate stations. This means that all 5 stations would have at least 2 trains an hour, and obviously Woburn Sands and Ridgemont would benefit from 4. It would mean that more people would have access to a direct service to Cambridge without having to change trains, and it would mean more people would have access to more frequent service. But of course, by relocating the stations, there will of course be the potential for some people to be slightly further away from the station than they are currently. However, some people will be slightly closer, so there are pros and cons with that, depending on exactly where you are along the line. We move on to the next slide. And again, I won't dwell on it, but there's an outline timetable included in the consultation materials. Next slide. So looking at the questions that we've received so far, again, these are, as I say, representative examples of the questions that try to pick out some of the key themes that have emerged. So the first one is, how can the capital cost difference between concept 1 and concept 2 be cost neutral, given concept 2 involves 5 brand new stations, whereas concept 1 involves 2 revamped stations and 1 new station at Bedford St John's? That's a very good question. I have to say it's relatively early stages at the moment in the design process, so our capital cost estimates at the moment are at a very high level. However, The big difference between concept 1 and concept 2 is that in concept 1, we still have the hourly stopping service along the line. In that concept, the stopping service gets caught up by the faster east-west rail services. And so we have to provide additional facilities to enable the fast trains to overtake the slow trains. How we would do that is we'd provide a section of railway that had 4 tracks, so a short section of 4-track railway in the Ridgemont area, or between Ridgemont and Astley Guys in fact. What happens there is the slower train would pull into the passing loop. The fast train would pull up alongside at the relocated Ridgemont station. People could change between the trains, and then the fast train can move ahead of the slower one. That does, however, mean we are having to spend a fair bit of money providing those additional passing loops. In concept 2, we don't have to provide those, and therefore that money is available to spend on other things, such as improved stations at the locations we're suggesting. So on the basis of the work we've done so far, we believe broadly the 2 concepts cost about the same. The difference is marginal between the 2 based on what we've done so far. So that hopefully answers that question. Moving on to the next one. Do you know how many passengers walk from their village to their station without using a car? They may now have to travel by car to their new station, which seems counterproductive. Again, a very good question. We have looked at journeys on the route currently, and we will be looking in more depth as we move forward. As I said, there will potentially be some people who do have to travel a bit further to get to the station. Others might have a shorter journey to and from the station. And one of the things we're particularly keen to hear feedback on in the consultation is exactly how people do use the line and how they do travel to their station. We are looking at a range of what we call first mile, last mile options. So facilities to enable people to get to and from the station, both at the origin and at the destination. We're working with England's Economic Heartlands on a study looking at potential options at the moment, and we'd be really keen to hear from people what's important to them. The sorts of things we're looking at are quite wide-ranging. They could be anything from improvements to walking routes and potentially new sections of cycle path and so on, through to things like improved bus services and things like on-demand bus and taxi services, whereby you can book a bus or a taxi, a minibus or taxi to come and pick you up from your home, take you to the station at the time you need it to connect with the train. And again, at the other end of your journey, you can book something to take you to your final destination, whether that's again a minibus or a taxi, or it may be something like maybe a hire bike or even an electronic scooter as those things become more popular. Obviously, different modes suit different people, so not everyone will be comfortable getting on an electric scooter and completing their journey. And again, we're really keen to hear from people about how they would like to travel to and from the stations, what routes they currently use, and how they'd like to do that in future. Looking at the third question on there, how were the 5 proposed stations decided under option 2? So what we've done with the 5 proposed stations is we've taken a look at where the patterns of development are along the line currently. And we've also attempted to look at where we believe development's going to take place in the future, and that's based on information in the local authorities, local plans, and so on. Having done that, we've then attempted to identify locations which we think best balance the needs of local, existing and future communities along the line. Those locations are partly constrained by the characteristics of the railway and also the highway network around it. But we've attempted to find 5 locations that we think strike a good balance between the existing and future communities along the railway. Again, we are seeking feedback on those 5 locations, and we have actually gone as far as to say if we've got those 5 locations wrong in people's views, we'd like to hear about that. We are open to listening to alternative suggestions for some of those stations, although I have to say in the consultation documents, we do set out some criteria that alternative locations would have to be for us to be able to consider them. But that is all set out in the various consultation documents. On the 4th question there, how can a meaningful traffic assessment be done around Lidlington and Ridgemont when the triple impacts of the new town, expanded Marston Gate and operation of Cabanta are yet to be known? So looking at the traffic assessment, we're at an early stage with that. We are about to embark on some fairly detailed traffic modelling, and we will of course be working with the local highway authorities as we do that. That traffic modelling will attempt to take into account the developments we know are either in the process of being built at the moment or are likely to come on stream before the railway goes live, and indeed also those that will follow the railway. Obviously, as we move forward through the design process, we will keep reviewing that traffic modelling, and we'll try and keep that up to date as things change. We will be looking at traffic movements in quite some detail as part of that in the next stage of the design work. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So the next thing we're looking at is the level crossings on the Marston Vale line. Next one, please. So here we've got 3 questions on subject to level crossings. We've got 3 points to say about the level crossings here. I think the first one's quite an important one. We currently have 31 level crossings on the Marston Vale line. For a line that is the length that it is, just under 17 miles, about 16.5 miles, that's quite a lot of level crossings in quite a short space of quite a short distance. These level crossings come in all different shapes and sizes. They include public highways, private access roads. There are a number of public footpaths and bridleways that go across the railway. And also there are some crossings that are provided for farmers to move between different parts of their land holdings. Now, obviously, we recognise that level crossings are an important part of the local communities. They allow people to travel between the different parts of villages and so on. And we realise that making changes can have quite an impact on those communities. What we're trying to do in the options we've put forward is we're trying to balance the needs of the local community with a desire to make the railway safer for everyone. That's the local communities around the railways and obviously the people that use the railways as well. Moving on. So Network Rail has already gained permission to close 11 of the 31 level crossings as part of their previous proposal for the introduction of an hourly train service between Oxford and Bedford. And in addition to those 11, Network Rail has recently also closed a further 3 level crossings on the line. So in total, Network Rail had consent for the closure of 14 of the crossings. Because we are now consulting on a much increased level of train service on the route, we've had to revisit what Network Rail previously sought consent for. And as a result of that, we believe we need to close more level crossings. And certainly we are required by the Office of Rail and Road, when undertaking a project of this nature, to look at every possible opportunity to remove level crossings to increase the safety of the railway. Next slide, please. So why are we proposing this work? Well, as I say, safety concerns are a major factor in this. The Office of Rail and Road have an objective to remove level crossings wherever possible, and they make that a requirement on major projects, as I've just said. We would be looking at adding, let's say, up to 4 trains an hour to the existing train service, and those trains will be running faster than the trains that currently use the line. So that further increases the safety risk at each level crossing. And we believe that in the majority of cases, the additional level of train service just makes the level crossings untenable going forward. So what are our proposals? As I said, there are 31 crossings on the line currently. Those crosses on the slide there represent the level crossings, and as you can see, they are quite tightly packed in some places. We'd be providing somewhere between 16 and 19 new bridges over the railway to help maintain the links that we would be losing as a result of the level crossings closing. The aim is to try and achieve a convenience for all existing users and maintain rights of way wherever possible. Obviously, without the level crossings and with bridges instead, safety is improved given the increase in rail traffic on the line. And also, one thing that people perhaps don't realise is actually level crossings are sometimes a source of reliability problems. Perhaps it is more obvious on the Marston Vale line than in other areas because they have been causing some problems recently. With level crossings removed, that makes for a much more reliable railway, which minimises delays and makes the train service more attractive to use. Next slide, please. So here we have some questions that have come in around the subject of level crossings. Are East West Rail in discussions with the local councils regarding potential options, e.g. for mitigation of the closure of level crossings? So as I say, we are looking at traffic modelling in the area. We are taking that into account. We will be talking in depth, or in further depth rather, to the various highway authorities along the route. And we will be working with them as we develop our options. But also we are really keen to hear what local residents feel about the level crossings and the options we put forward. We've attempted to find solutions that maintain that connectivity across the railway, but we'd be really keen to hear whether what we've put forward actually achieves what people need it to. What will happen for foot traffic and road traffic if my local level crossing is closed? Well, that very much depends on the individual location. The consultation document set out options for each of the level crossings or groups of level crossings along the line. In some locations, we have a number of different options set out there. And again, as I say, we're very keen to hear feedback on those. So the final one on this section, I'm a resident of Lidlington and I want to understand exactly where the new road crossing would go. In that particular instance, I would refer you to the consultation document that does provide details. In this case, we're talking about a potential new road connection between Sheeptick End and Greensound Ridge as one option, but also an option there to maintain the level crossing in its current position. That's that particular location. It does give a rough idea of where the road would go. I have to say though, at this stage, that is just an approximate indication. If we were to take the option through for the new road and the new bridge to go in there, we have a lot more design work to do. We will be refining those designs as we move forward, and we hope at the next stage of consultation to present a final version of exactly where a bridge would go if that were the option that were taken forward. Moving on, please. So the next one is on the way in which we actually undertake the construction work on the railway. We've had a general theme of which option for construction blockades causes the least disruption. That's a question that's come through quite a few times. If we go on to the next slide. So a quick reminder, we've put forward 3 options there. First option is a series of short closures of the railway. Those closures rather would mostly be confined to evenings and weekends. So it would mean work being done during those times. Option 2 offers up a prolonged blockade. So that would be a closure of the railway for an extended period. We've yet to fully define how long that would be, but that could potentially be 18 months or more, depending on exactly how we plan the work going forward. Or option 3 would be a mix of long and short blockades. So some weekend and evening closures plus a slightly shorter, longer closure as well. Can we just move on to the next slide a second? Sorry, there isn't another one on this one. Then move back. Sorry, apologies. So to answer the question as phrased, which one causes the least disruption? There isn't really a straight answer to that. All 3 options have pros and cons, and I think it very much depends on your individual position. So as I say, option 1 is a series of short closures, and the benefit of that is that it would allow the train service to continue to operate for a lot of the time, particularly during midweek when people use it most for travelling to work or to school, etc. The downside of that is it does mean the construction period would drag on for a lot longer, and it would be a lot longer before we actually saw the benefits of the upgrade coming to being. It would also mean that the majority of the work would have to be done overnight and at weekends. And that does potentially have a consequence in terms of disruption to people living very close to the railway. It could mean that there are more occasions when work is going on close to homes, less sociable hours. Option 2, the prolonged blockade, that has the benefit of really giving the construction gangs a clear run at getting the job done. With option 1, the work is done in short bursts, and after each closure of the line, we have to put the railway back together again, ready to provide a train service on Monday morning. With option 2, we don't have to worry about that. The construction teams get stuck in and just keep going. It does mean that most of the work can be carried out during daytimes, during midweek periods as well. So there would be far less overnight working and working, for example, on a Sunday. Option 3 would have a mix of long blockades that provides a mixture of the benefits or disadvantages of the two. The other thing to say about option 2, sorry, which I forgot to mention, of course, the downside of option 2 is that we can't, for that duration, run a train service. We would be looking, therefore, at providing an alternative service during that period. But for people who are perhaps fearing the dreaded rail replacement bus service, just because we're running a rail replacement service doesn't mean to say we have to just run a bus at exactly the same times that the train service runs or exactly the same route. Certainly, if we were going to go down that avenue, we'd be looking at how that service could be tailored to meet the needs of the community. Whether that were perhaps a mixture of different bus services, some of which were running only to certain stations and therefore linking places together much more quickly, or perhaps dedicated bus services for certain heavy flows. So we know, for example, the sixth form college near Stewartby generates a lot of traffic. So possibly, we could consider things like a dedicated service to deal with that college traffic, which was tailored just to suit the times of the most popular destinations arising from that traffic. So there are lots of options that we could look at there. And again, feedback on that is something we're very keen to hear. Okay, I think I've covered everything I was going to say there, so I'll hand over back to Ian to talk about the approach to consultation. Thanks very much.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so in terms of our approach to consultation, because it's because of the current circumstances, of course, all of our consultation has had to be virtual. It's been a bit of a learning curve for us, to be honest, but there's been quite a lot of government guidance on this, and Planning Inspectorate provide quite a bit of guidance, and we followed that. And actually, we've managed to reach a great number of people in a lot of different ways, ranging from the posted versions of the consultation document that come through people's doors to conversations like this, and we've carried out group conversations with groups of residents, as you'll know, with parish councils, with MPs, and with the industry. So actually, it's a 10-week consultation, but has covered quite a lot of ground, and obviously physically it does cover a lot of ground because it's quite a long scheme. You've asked us some questions about consultation. The first being around would we extend the consultation to allow for face-to-face events? Well, current consultation finishes on the 9th of June. We've decided that because of the continued uncertainty and the timing of restrictions being lifted, that we won't extend the consultation any further beyond the 9th of June. And frankly, we do feel that we've covered the objectives of consultation in this 10-week period. We were conscious when we consulted that we were spanning local elections, and so we made sure that there was sufficient time beyond the end of the elections for newly elected councillors to have their say, and we've been involved in meetings, with one-to-one meetings with some of those county councillors and so on. In terms of how we'll analyse feedback from consultation and rank the concepts, well, we have our criteria for assessing the different routes and options that we've put in front of you, and we've used those. We've explained those in the documents that we've published. In terms of how we analyse the feedback from you, from consultation, that's quite a complicated process. We've employed external supports from consultants to help us to do that because of the sheer volume of information that we're receiving. But what we're doing is we're already starting to look at the trend information that we're getting back, and we're producing, we will be producing a consultation report, which will which will be a factual report setting out the views that have been expressed and analysing those. We're also then mainly for the section to the east of Bedford, we're also intending to announce a preferred alignment later on this year. For this section, where there are 2 route options, which is the third point here, when we go to further consultation, which will be probably early next year, we'll consult then on a scheme which is as close as possible to the type of scheme that we'd want to submit for our planning application. It won't be complete. That's the whole purpose of that further consultation. But our intention at that time is to give you as much information as we possibly can about the concept that we're taking forward to submit for planning. In terms of level crossing options and station locations, I think we'll have a pretty firm view by that stage what our preference is based on all the information we've received. It may be the case that the 2 options that Stephen has described for the two ways in which we can provide the service might still be on the table. But if they are, we'll explain to you where we stand with those and what emerging preference there is for those. Either way, of course, most of what we do along the Marsden Vale line will be the same in terms of the work we do on the track and the work that we do with level crossings. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Kirsty Young at this point. So Kirsty is she leads our land team in East West Rail, and she'll just take you through this slide, which gives him a bit of information about how the land issues work and compensation works in relation to the scheme. So Kirsty.
Hello, hi, thanks, Ian. So yes, I lead the East West Rail land team, which also includes a number of specialist property surveyors from Ardent who have currently joined us really as our long-term property partners. So the intention is that they will sort of be with us through the duration of the scheme, so that we're able to sort of engage with landowners and keep that continuity as we go forward from development into delivery potentially as well. As we were saying there, our proposals are an early stage in terms of the design, but we started talking to landowners that are potentially could be affected by the options that we're currently consulting on. So looking at some of the sort of interventions, we're talking about things like footbridges or sort of under bridges or things. These may potentially need land in order to deliver them. So we've started those discussions with those landowners within those search areas to really see what that would mean, and to start considering sort of, you know, how we might minimize impacts or mitigate sort of impacts as we go forward. As we go forward through the DCO process, there'll obviously be more, you know, there'll be more engagement. There'll also be a further round of statutory consultation, and then going into the development consent order process. And as we go into that development consent order process, we would be looking to seek compulsory purchase powers as part of that DCO. So that's one of the sort of key reasons why we really want to start engaging with landowners early, to really understand how we could mitigate that. Kind of later, we are holding through the team. Basically, we have written to sort of potentially affected landowners. We are holding sort of, you know, virtual meetings with those through Teams or Zoom or a call if that's sort of preferred, to really sort of meet individually with each of those and to really talk people through the proposals. And sort of help them understand as well what information they can obtain through the consultation, and to sort of allow them to inform their so we can really and allow them to obviously ask sort of specific questions basically that they might have of us, sort of thing, to sort of help them understand and also feed into the consultation. As well as that, there's obviously the more general sort of community engagement, and that does include obviously some other adjacent neighbours and things who may not be potentially directly affected by land acquisition, but may also obviously have a number of questions around about how, when the future project is maybe during construction or during operation, what's that going to mean for them? So we're available to sort of hopefully help people with any particular questions they might have on that. One of the things we do recognise is that by publishing our proposals themselves, that can have an impact upon people in terms of if they wanted to, sell their property, and would potentially have an effect on the value of the property and their ability to sell. There is statutory provisions out there called statutory blight. So further down the line, when a DCO is served, people in that situation could potentially serve a blight notice, and if they were unable to sell at a reasonable price, then they could ask basically us as the promoters, if you like, to acquire their land, to pay them compensation for that. That's obviously quite late down the process, so we are consulting on a discretionary purchase scheme, the need to sell scheme, which would come in earlier. So it would come in potentially when we have a preferred option in areas which, for I think the area that we're looking at would probably be statutory consultation, and it would also look at actually being able to apply for potentially for those adjacent landowners, again if there's a need to sell. So really there needs to be perhaps a pressing need to sell, maybe a change in income, that type of thing, that actually people need to sell but are unable to sell at the right price because of the project itself. There would then be a sort of mitigation for them to contact us and to seek us to purchase that. So we are consulting on that. I'd encourage anybody who wants to respond back to the questions, particularly on that scheme, but also to highlight any particular circumstances themselves if they feel that that's not addressed by the scheme that we're proposing, to let us know, to feed that into this consultation. So we do have the dedicated team in place. We have written to all landowners. We're currently writing another letter to send out this week, just to remind people that there's another couple of weeks left in the consultation. Obviously, they don't need to speak to us before the end of consultation, but perhaps they may want to do so before they actually submit in their response. So we're just seeking to sort of encourage people to take us up on that offer, basically before the 9th of June. But we will be available for ongoing engagement sort of thereafter as we continue to develop the scheme. We've got a website as well, Land and Property, so there's further information available on our Land and Property website, and we have a dedicated phone line and email for people to contact us. And I think that's the end of the slide, so I'll hand back to Ian.
Okay, all right, thanks Kirsty, and appreciate the multitasking there. Doing bedtime at the same time. So in terms of how your communities can get involved, I'm sure you know quite a lot of this already because the consultation's been running for a few weeks, and I want to move on to Q&A as quickly as possible. But there are virtual consultation rooms on our website. We are running a whole series of live chat events, which are 2-hour sessions, where we have people at the other end of the line who can respond sort of interactively with questions that are raised. We've got a dedicated phone line that's been available throughout the consultation period, and there's a feedback form so that for those who want to feedback in hard copy, they can still do that. On to the next slide, please. So yeah, in terms of live chat sessions, you can speak to Stephen again, as you can see on the screen there, at live chat sessions in week 8. So that's on Thursday, the 27th of May, so later this week, and next Saturday, 29th, and then in the following week, 31st of May, 1st of June, and 2nd of June. Okay, and as I said right at the beginning, we're keen to understand what you and your residents think about the emerging proposals, and we hope you'll help your residents to respond using any of those means. But please encourage them to write back to us and tell them what they think. Tell us what they think, because obviously the more feedback we get, the better picture we build up of the views locally. So that's the end of the presentation. Well, I'll leave it there, and I think Geordie's going to field the Q&A. So Geordie, back to you, I think.
Yes, thanks, Ian. During the presentation, we've already had a few questions. So while the rest of the people in the session kind of like think of questions that they want to put forward, I'm going to start with one that has been submitted by Lynn around, are the existing tracks sufficient to service the increased new service? And I suppose like Stephen might be best placed to answer that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Geordie. Are the existing tracks sufficient for the proposed level of service? Well, there's two different ways of looking at that. First of all, the number of tracks that we have. The railway currently between Bletchley and Bedford mostly comprises 2 tracks throughout the route. However, at the two ends, at the Bletchley end and at the Bedford end, there are sections where there is just a single track currently. At those two ends of the route, we are looking to add a second track to provide a consistent 2 tracks right the way through the length of the route. And as I mentioned earlier, in concept 1, we would also have to provide a short section of 4-track railway between Ridgemont and Aspley Guys. So for the majority of the route, though, the existing 2 tracks is adequate and provides adequate capacity. In terms of the tracks themselves, we're still doing investigations into the existing condition of the track and also the formation that holds the track up. From the work we've done to date, we believe that the majority of the track on the route is likely to have to be replaced. So we are factoring that into our proposals. But we would replace that with a modern track form, which is suitable for the speed and level of traffic we propose to operate over the railway.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Next question that came through the chat, unless Lynn wants to kind of like follow up on what you just said. If not, we'll move on to next question on the chat that we received, which was from Hugh, around what criteria will be used by EWR to choose whether an underpass or bridge over the closed level crossings is appropriate, and will the cost be a decisive factor? Think not sure if like Stephen or Ian. Stephen, you take it.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, Ian, feel free to chip in if you want as well. So we've set out in the consultation documents, there are a series of what we've termed assessment factors that we use for making decisions between different options on the infrastructure, and they include quite a wide range of things. Cost is one of those factors, but cost is not the only factor. We have to balance a whole range of different issues in deciding which options to take forward. And indeed, even deciding which options to propose. In particular, looking between a bridge over the railway or a bridge under the railway, there are various factors that influence that decision, including local geology, groundwater conditions, and things like that. And on top of that, the types of users we're looking at who are likely to be using that crossing. So there are a whole range of factors. And while cost is an important one, it's certainly not the only one, and we don't automatically default to the cheapest option.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, Stephen, I think, the appearance of what we do is also really important. And, as we get into the next phase of consultation, because I appreciate we've not given you very much detail about that at this stage because we just haven't done that much design yet. But, we are very conscious and sensitive to the fact that whatever we do needs to fit into the local setting, and sometimes bridges or underpasses sited badly can be a bit of an eyesore, to be honest. So I think again, it's important to hear your views on that and how best we can construct crossings that fit well with their setting, because there is a commitment that existing crossings will be kept open, but equally, as Stephen said half an hour ago, really, there's also a fairly clear direction from the Office of Road and Rail that's where possible, level crossings should be closed, and that's mainly for safety reasons, to be honest. Although we do have an operational reason here as well, because once we get the whole railway open between Oxford and Cambridge, the frequency of trains means that the crossing will be shut for far more time than it's open, which isn't particularly practical. So two major reasons why we're going to have to do something different.
Brilliant.
Julie.
Next question. Yes, so next question on the list is from Chris. He says that he can get from Marston Vale to Cambridge University or Addenbrooke's Hospital in under an hour, Oxford University in an hour and a quarter, and he can catch a bus to Bedford Hospital Centre in under 20 minutes. If he wants to go to London, he drives to Fleetwick and get to London in 45 minutes. Why should he use a slower and less convenient service to get to either end of the Arc or London? It takes him 20 minutes to walk to Marston Station, at least in the rain. So why is East West Rail convenient for him? I think Ian, you might be able to take this one.
Yeah. Okay. So the rationale for this program is to connect up communities right the way along the length of the route between Oxford and Cambridge, and what we're trying to do is to site stations at locations that offer most benefit. And as Stephen said, for some people that probably means that the station is a bit further from where they live than perhaps the current station is today. But in reality, what we're trying to do is to look at the current living patterns that where houses are currently in the area, to look at where future development is likely to take place and try and achieve the best fit. So it's why we're asking you at this stage about the service and where you believe it should or how you believe the service should work. So our objective is to make this work for as many people as possible. I suppose we do recognize that for some people, for various circumstances, it might not be the right solution, but our objective very much is to find the best solution for the Arc.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Ian's just said there, of course, the railway isn't the answer for every journey. It never will be. But what we are hoping to do in providing the railway is provide some choice for people. One thing that the railways are hopefully going to be very good at providing on this route is a reliable journey time, one that is the same amount every day reliably, whereas road journeys can be a bit more unpredictable. So we're also offering that more frequent level of service. So again, if we're at a location that's got 4 trains an hour, it's almost a turn up and go service. You almost don't need to know the timetable, because the most you'll be waiting is 15 minutes. So we're never going to get to a point where the railway is the answer for every single person for every single journey. But what we're hoping to do is provide a reliable alternative that people can use. And increasingly, we are seeing, particularly in younger people, we're seeing less propensity to own a car and have a car as perhaps traditionally people might have done. So for people moving into the area who perhaps don't have a car and don't necessarily want to own a car, having reliable public transport in the area will enable them to get between their home and work or leisure activity or whatever else it is they need to travel for.
May I just say that even if I buy a brand new house as somebody who's working in London, then and you're going to build a brand new station in the 5,000 new houses which are going to be built in Marston Vale, which would be the most convenient, obviously, to getting for a job in Bedford or in Milton Keynes. If I was working in London, and I imagine quite a few people will work in London, the most obvious thing that I'm going to do is to drive through Millbrook or Lidlington, drive to Flitwick Station, or drive to Bedford and catch the fast train to London. I am not going to jump on a train and then have to get a connection either at Bedford main station or Bletchley to get the other main line down to London. I'm sorry, I don't get really the rationale. I realise that it's all to do with the ARC, and that's a belief the NIC have, and go with it. But I don't see the convenience to the local community.
I think, to be honest though, Chris, this railway is about connecting up communities along the ARC. It will certainly create connections to mainline trains to London and up to the Midlands, but its main purpose really is not that. Its main purpose is to connect the towns and villages along the corridor. So providing interchange is certainly important, but the idea is that we try and create a service that allows people to live and work in the Oxford to Cambridge area.
But it was to enable the high tech, really, to make the ARC a high tech centre of achievement. So you're building up places like Cranfield University, for instance, if you look at our centre, or Lockheed Martin, or the test centre at Millbrook, all of which are high tech companies and centres of excellence. And it's getting people to those places. And walking from Millbrook to, well, I suppose you could walk from Millbrook station, which you may or may not be connecting to the Millbrook training ground, but it's going to be nice and wet unless there's going to be a train service. And Cranfield University, you try getting from Millbrook station to Cranfield University. That would be quite a feat. There'll be at least 5 train connections going into Bedford and back. You'd be better going to Bedford and coming back out on the Cranfield bus. I'm not objecting to your overall objective. What I'm saying is there's got to be an awful lot of infrastructure which goes with this to cross connect to places of high. If your aim is to get the ARC, then you've got to get to the high tech places, or you've got to get people to high tech places. Yeah. Otherwise, they will use their car. Or scooter.
Yeah, no, that's true, and you're absolutely right that that sort of first mile and last mile part of connectivity is really important, whether it's in a private car or on a bus or by taxi or something else. We are thinking about connectivity beyond just getting people to railway stations. So I take your point. We do need to have a solution that connects as many people as possible to where they need to go.
And so next question on the list is, if I'm not mistaken, Jean saying, since there will be no face-to-face consultation sessions, will it be possible to have some on-site visits to get local knowledge on the ground? And I think I'm going to hand this one to Stephen.
Yeah, okay. So on the point of getting some local knowledge on the ground, I think first thing to say is we are to varying degrees within the team familiar with the local territory. We're not just coming at this completely blind and not understanding the local geography at all. I don't live a million miles away from the route myself. I've driven along it, I've walked along it, I've visited every station on the line, every level crossing on the line, walked around the various local communities in the past. So, I'm just because we haven't been able to get out quite as much as we would have liked to over recent weeks and months, it doesn't mean that we haven't been out there. It doesn't mean that the teams working on this don't know the route. There is a reasonably high degree of local understanding. I'm not claiming by any stretch of the imagination that we know everything, that we have the insight, obviously, that local people have. And again, that's why it's really important we get some feedback through this consultation to really bring depth of understanding to some of the issues. Obviously, in the current circumstances, we can't do site visits in the way that we would like to. We can't come and meet people in the way that we want to. We will obviously keep that under review as the situation continues to evolve. But I would say, please rest assured, we're not doing this totally blind. We do have a pretty good understanding of the corridor and some of the local issues. But again, as I say, that local feedback is really, really valuable in helping us build that knowledge and enhance that knowledge further.
Thank you, Stephen. If I just may say that had people sort of really looked at it, nobody would put a footbridge along By Road and close By Road, for example. It's just not, you know, that's a bit of a kick in the teeth, to be quite frank, because you know, the By Road is the proximity it is as among other dwellings, but to then go and put a footbridge along there and is just, well, ridiculous in the villagers' mind. I know I obviously like to suggest another option of putting it, in fact, the other side of the crossing where there just seems to be more land. But it's that sort of thing where the local knowledge actually on the ground, looking at, and we can meet in small groups, that's not restricted. And so I don't see why COVID is a problem at this stage, because we'll be outside. You know, we could have on the ground discussions with local people. I'm not suggesting a great big bunch.
No, picking up the point of that footbridge. I mean, not wanting to get too drawn into sort of individual details, but we realised that at that particular site we are dealing with a very difficult site. It is very constrained. We have looked at putting the footbridge the other side, and there isn't the safe means of access to get to it on the south side of the railway. It is a very challenging site, but I mean, of course, in the consultation, this is the whole point of the consultation. If there are other ideas and better ideas out there within the local community, we really want to hear them. So this is the whole point of having this consultation. And although I understand it must be frustrating that, you know, you can't have that face-to-face conversation with us at the moment. Unfortunately, we are working to guidance which said we can't come out and do those visits right now. We are keeping that under review, and as soon as we can safely come out and do that, we will be doing that.
Okay, I think somebody mentioned, I'm not sure if it was Ian or you, Stephen, that it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to do this line, but it's also a lifetime, and for generations could be a big mistake if it's done badly. And is to sever Lidlington without, you know, the proper understanding. Well, there'll be a mass exodus.
we totally understand that point. You know, what we build, we're not building for today, we're not building for tomorrow, we're potentially building for the next 100 years. So, you know, it's going to be there for a while. It's going to have long-term effect on the communities that it serves. We do need to get it right, and that's the very reason why we're asking for that feedback. I mean, as I say, you know, the more feedback we get, the more comments, the more details, the more ideas that come in, the better the outcome's going to be. Because certainly we don't want to sever communities, we don't want to make people's life a misery. And because, you know, recognising the specific difficulties at Lidlington is one of the few places where we have actually put in an option to keep the level crossing open, because we realise the challenges around closing the crossing there are quite large. So, you know, in that location, we have put in an option to keep the crossing open there and not build that bridge. So, you know, if that's a preference of the local community, then let's hear it.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Next question on the list is from Robert Morris, who asks, is there any evidence to say that 4 trains an hour will be financially viable? And I think Stephen.
Yeah, so I'll have a go at answering that best I can. The 4 trains an hour level of train service is something that comes from the remit we have from the Department of Transport. There's quite a lot of research that suggests that 4 trains an hour, as I mentioned earlier, I think in one of the other answers, that level of service almost becomes a turn up and go service where you don't really need to know the times of the trains, because, as I say, the longest you'll be waiting is 15 minutes if you happen to be unfortunate enough to just miss a train. And there is plenty of evidence out there that suggests that operating at that level of service does actually drive quite a lot of demand. You know, it does cause people to want to use the train more, because it does facilitate more journeys. It does make them more convenient, and particularly on those sorts of journeys we're likely to see on this line that are generally going to be of a shorter duration. Having that higher frequency service does make the train more attractive. So we are working on that basis at the moment, certainly. Obviously, we're doing demand forecasting work. Obviously, we're looking at the business case for this and the costs associated with operating that level of service. But we currently believe that's the right level of service to be offering.
Yeah, and I mean, it's about providing future capacity as well, Stephen, isn't it? So that, you know, in the same way as it would be short-sighted to build the wrong type of crossing right now, it would also be pretty short-sighted to build a level of capacity that in a few years' time somebody'd have to come back and increase. So we are making provision for the need of the railway going forward. And obviously we can't predict what the capacity might need to be in 50 years from now, but certainly the work that we're doing right now will be sufficient to give us an idea of the demand level that's going to be economic for the railway going forward.
I mean, a turn up and go service is all well and good when there's actually a station near where somebody actually lives, but you're building these new stations in the middle of nowhere, and the only station that's existing at the moment that's actually serves people who live near it is being closed. It just seems ridiculous. You keep quoting statistics of things where they are national statistics for it's like young people with driving licenses. If you actually look at the deeper figures in that survey, people living in rural areas, it is still quite high take up of car ownership, whereas yes, in London, nobody needs a car. The transport is so heavy. Round in our rural areas, transport will not be financially viable enough to create a service that people are willing to use. To say a station in the middle of nowhere, as Chris Martin pointed out, people who are going to have to drive to that station, they might as well drive to where, if you're talking about this for short journeys, they might as well drive to the place they were going to in the first place.
Okay, so you know, this is the opportunity for you to feed back to us where you think the station should be. So honestly, if you have a different view, you should tell us. And you know, nothing is fixed at this stage. So so now's the time to make your views known to us. Yeah, I think, you know, we've explained the principle of what we're trying to create here, which is a railway that joins communities within the arc. We've tried not to put stations in the middle of nowhere. We've tried to put them somewhere where we think they can be more accessible. But if you think we've got that wrong, you know, really, you should tell us.
You're creating a city railway for the rural area.
Well, we're trying not to, but if you think that, you know, from a resident's perspective or a parish council's perspective, you know, if you think that's what we're doing, then, you know, help us and tell us where you think we should be placing stations that would give you the sort of service that you need as a community.
Yeah, I just said that. Sorry, I was just going to add to what Ian said there. We've put forward two concepts for the train service. One leaves the stations where they are. So if where the stations currently are is the right place, and you think that better serves the community, then again, through the feedback, you know, please express that preference.
A heavily weighted document in both terms of the thing, where you say which concepts you are preferring, which leaves most people to believe that other concepts are not to be considered fully.
Well, it's disappointing to hear that it comes across like that, but certainly at the moment, all the concepts that are presented, unless it explicitly talked about a preference, we are completely agnostic on the options. You know, the two train service concepts, we have no strong view one way or the other. They score relatively equally against the criteria we've used to put them together so far. They both have pros and cons. So there is no preconceived idea about which one's going to be taken forward. They are being treated equally.
Sure,
Yeah,
you're back to Ian's point, which is it's the final mile that really matters. It's us as a parish getting to the station, and it's us getting from St John's or Bedford main station to Waitrose or Bedford Hospital. I mean, that's the key point. You're going to build a marvelous service which will get people from that station of yours to another station. It is how you get, and why would I not use then my own car or bus to actually do that journey?
Yeah, although a station at Bedford St John's, of course, as there is at the moment, is an option. So absolutely, that's something we can consider, as we have been. And as Stephen said, you know, genuinely we don't have a preconceived view. We're not trying to bias anybody's thinking at this stage at all. I mean, obviously we are going to have to come up with a solution, but at this stage, you know, we're listening to the views that are expressed along the corridor. So,
you know, as I expressed earlier, we're looking at first mile, last mile travel in quite a lot of detail. As I said, we're working with England's economic heartland on that. And we are looking at quite a broad range of options, as I say, not just the conventional option of, you know, relying on an ordinary scheduled bus service or expecting people to walk to their final destination. We're talking about fully joined up options here. So for example, and this is just one example, for example, you know, the ability to be able to book your journey from end to end, pay for it all in one go, such that, you know, you're sat at home, whether it's a taxi or a minibus or whatever, pulls up outside your house and collects you, takes you to the station at the right time for the train. And again, there's something at the other end waiting for you to take you that final bit of the journey. And all of that paid for in a single transaction, so that you don't have the worry of, am I going to be able to find a bus or a taxi? I don't know where the bus services stop and things like that. All those issues are being factored into the thinking, because, as you rightly said, you know, people don't want to go to the train station. They want to go to a place beyond the train station, and it's about making sure that journey from where they start to where they finish is as easy and as straightforward as possible.
Brilliant. So final question from the chat, and I see that we also have like a hand from David. So Adele asked, how long will the need to sell scheme and blight notice scheme remain in place? 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? And I think like this is one for Kirsty. I'm not sure if Kirsty can hear us. I think she's frozen slightly, or is it just me?
she's certainly not moving very much.
It's just like great timing, isn't it?
Mona Lisa.
So wait, I think then like what we can do is like while Kirsty kind of tries to get back on, let's go to David, and then we can go back to.
Well, I can answer that question for Kirsty. So as far as the need to sell is concerned, so as Kirsty said, the need to sell scheme would be introduced, subject to this consultation, would be introduced when the preferred scheme is announced for the section between Bedford and Cambridge. We've chosen that as a date because it is the next sort of major public announcement on the scheme, and it's also a point at which there will be residents affected around Bedford and in other places where the need to sell scheme is very relevant. But eventually it will be superseded by a statutory blight position. Once we submit our application, then effectively it's overtaken by events, and statutory blight provisions apply. Kirsty, I think you're back now, are you? I think I saw you move then.
Just briefly.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the answer she would have probably given.
Mind reader.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just say, it was more, you know, do residents have to take up these schemes within a certain amount of time, or you know, if something was to occur a year or so later and they found that they needed to move, would the scheme still be open? That was more the point.
Oh, I see. Well, I guess it depends on the reason for needing to move. If it's because their house is actually blighted by the scheme, i.e., if we were to build it, that their house would need to be demolished, then until the scheme becomes a reality, that opportunity is there. Beyond that point, of course, then the normal sort of issues around compulsory purchase would come into play, although as Kirsty said, we'd try and negotiate first. Compulsory purchase is a last resort, but even if a resident got to that point, compulsory purchase is still going to provide that resident with market value for the property, so they would still get that. I suppose if it was somebody living much further away and just decided they didn't like it after 3 years, that is a slightly different position from what we've just described.
Because I mean, I live on By Road in Lidlington, so I'm extremely worried about how my street is going to look and how close to my house your ramps are going to be on your footbridge. So, but really, until it's built, it's difficult for me to envisage that. So, if the DCO is issued, but then the footbridge doesn't appear for another 2-3 years, that's my issue. Often it's, it's not, you fear something, but it might not be as bad as you think, but we won't really know that, will we?
Yeah, and it does depend very much on proximity as to whether you would be eligible for any compensation. Kirsty, I think you're back with us now. I definitely saw you move that time. I don't know if you want to add. Maybe not.
She put an answer in the chat.
Oh, did she?
Oh, yes.
Ah, there you go. Yes, she did. Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully we're going to try and see if she can switch off her camera and that improves slightly her connection. Yeah, just the wonders of technology at times. In next question, I think we've covered your point, Adele, unless there's something else you want to follow up with. If not, then we'll go to David, who has his hand raised.
Okay, I'm also a parish councillor with Lidlington. Whilst I'm loath to see the level crossing closed for the obvious reasons that have been stated, two things have come out of tonight is that leaving the level crossing open or openable and trains going through at 110 miles an hour on a country station worries the life out of me. The draft from those trains, Lidlington platform, is probably one of the shallowest that we've got. It's got railings behind it. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. The second disaster for you could be the fact that you want to go over Greensand Ridge. Greensand, as the name implies, is literally green sand. It was used to build bricks in the early days. Because it's sand, it slips and slides, and at the moment it's moving at the rate of something like 10 millimeters per year. Eventually, it'll cover over your station on Lidlington platform. So really, you need to be looking at that. As you mentioned, geological surveys. Don't think you've done one on that. It's a 1 in 20 hill going up over the top. Yep. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, and it's going to be destroyed. Could you not look at an option of running through the allotments, as has already been suggested, and then running through, possibly in a cutting, under Station Road and up round the back of Lidlington on the Marston side, joining Marston Road, and at the same time you're doing that, link a road from Sheeptick, Thrupp End, Station Road, round to Marston, put a roundabout in, come back over your new road bridge at Marston Crossing and back into Lidlington. As the meerkat say, simples.
If only it were. I'll try and answer a few of those points. On the trains going through the platforms. Look, first things first, it's 100, not 110 miles an hour, but let's not quibble over 10 miles an hour.
On one of your slides.
Yeah. Okay. Look. Yes, we realise that some of those platforms are incredibly narrow, and we will, of course, be looking at that. And one of the things we may have to do at some locations is widen those platforms. You know, trains passing through platforms at 100 miles an hour is not unusual. That happens all over the country. Admittedly, in some places, the platforms are wider than they are currently on this line, but that would be something we could address as part of the works. On the point of the alternative route for the railway, there is some detail on that in one of the consultation documents. We do talk about that. We have looked at it. It does entail a very, very large amount of work to actually deliver that. I think the total length of the route, the amount of earth that would need moving to enable the railway to build is quite a lot, and compared to the option of just using the existing corridor, the numbers we just don't believe they stack up from what
that's fine. So no, that's fine.
But the other point about the potential road link through from Sheeptick End through to Marston Road. The reason we didn't put that forward is there is a scheduled ancient monument in that area, and we believe there's archaeology potentially associated with that. So that caused us to not consider that option.
I think that's slightly further over from where I'm talking about, but
yeah,
however,
it is in that general corridor though.
Yeah.
But we've heard this sort of suggestion a couple of times from people. So I think, you know, again, it is something, you know, as a result of the feedback we're getting, I think we will take a second look at and just see that we haven't missed a trick there. Because yeah, we entirely accept that the option to build that road isn't easy. It's challenging for all kinds of reasons. We realise that certainly it does have an impact in terms of the construction of that road through what is currently open countryside and areas that are used by the public for recreation and so on. So we are alert to the fact that isn't necessarily a brilliant option from the point of view of some parts of the community, certainly. So as I say, that is the reason why we have the option in there to keep the level crossing open. And you know, on the back of the feedback we've had, I think we will have another look at whether the Sheeptick Road through to Manor Road option, you know, whether we were right to not consider that further.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant. On that note, and just conscious of the time that we've actually overrun by 5 minutes. Apologies about that.
That's my fault. I apologise.
No, not at all. I was just wondering, any kind of like final questions that people might want to raise before we draw these to a close. Chris, yes.
Can I ask if you've had detailed discussions with Covanta about how the lorries, you know, 570 movements a day going into their site? I was on a Covanta meeting recently, and they didn't seem to be aware of your latest proposals. I'm assuming that you're in, not constant, but you are in reasonable frequent communications with Covanta. Stuart B.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to double check who we have and haven't spoken to, but if we haven't spoken to them, they'll be on the list of meetings that we've got coming up. Yeah, look, we're well aware of the Covanta site. We're well aware that there is a significant number of lorry movements in and out of there. We've put forward options for a level crossing there that allow the road to remain open to their site whilst the new bridges are being built, and the 2 bridge options that we're proposing maintain access in and out of their site for those lorries.
There's some rather large lorries, as I'm sure you're aware, going to go into the site, and there was a discussion about you providing a curved ramp round to their site. So
there is an option certainly for the access road to, I mean, it couldn't be a straight access road. It's just not possible with the geometry there, but yes, it would be on a curve. But yes, we're aware that it's lorries that go in there, and the geometry would have to suit those vehicles.
And there are quite a few lorries carrying nasty stuff coming back out.
Okay, yeah, noted. But again, you know, the idea is that the road, those lorries would currently go down that road. We're not changing that. We're just putting them over a bridge over the top of the railway instead of crossing the tracks on the level.
But the entrance to their site is exceptionally close to the level crossing. Yeah,
and that's why the 2 options we've proposed resite that access point slightly further. I can't think which compass point it is off the top of my head, but they move them slightly further away from the railway to enable the lorries to actually come out of that site and turn safely onto the road to get over the bridge.
I'll look forward to the next meeting with Covanta, which is in a few weeks.
Oh, yeah, if I can unmute myself. Brilliant. So on that note, if there are no more questions, I suppose we can put the slides back up, and Ian, you can wrap up tonight's session.
Yes, okay. Thanks, Jodie. So in terms of what's next, we've kind of talked about it. I think we've gone the wrong way on these slides, haven't we? But anyway, in terms of what's next, we talked about it a little as we've been going through some of the Q&A here. So we haven't made any decisions yet about the options, either the overall option we'll choose, or indeed the options for some of the level crossings and replacement bridges. So what we intend to do next is obviously, once we've reviewed all of the outputs from the consultation, we'll do some more engineering work and some further design. We then, as I mentioned earlier on, we intend to come back to you to consult once again on a proposition, which will form the basis then ultimately for our planning application, for our development consent application. But at that further stage of consultation, there is still the opportunity to make your views known and for us to take them on board. That's likely to take place, as I say, sometime in the first half of next year. And then after that, we'll submit our development consent application. That goes to the planning inspectorate. You can look at their website already, and there's some basic information about our scheme there. But obviously, once our application is submitted, all of the information that we submit will be published on the website. The planning inspectorate will hold an examination into the proposals. That takes about 6 months, and then a further 6 months period is allowed in the process for both the planning inspectorate to write up their conclusions from the examination, and then 3 months at the end of the process for the Secretary of State to make a decision as to whether to grant a development consent order or not. And so, you know, there are a lot of opportunities to get involved as we continue through the process, and indeed, you know, over the next couple of years. So so that's all for this evening. Thank you for your time. We do appreciate your questions and your comments. Just to reiterate what we've said before, I think it's really important that that you put your comments in writing. Obviously, we take a note of these conversations as well, but the more you can encourage people to write to us and express their views, the better a picture of the needs of this scheme we'll be able to build up, and then hopefully design something that it provides the best solution for people living and working in this area. So thanks again for your time. Sorry we overran slightly, and no doubt we will talk again in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.